it's working. How are you guys this fine evening? I want to say y'all have made I don't want to call myself a liar, but I said all y'all weren't coming tonight. The setup was initially in the gym, and I was like, they ain't coming. Like, they talk about this topic all the time, but they not coming. Thank y'all for making a liar out of me. I appreciate you guys being here. Welcome to Brightside Opportunity Center. I am Walonda McLeod, the president and CEO of this fine building and establishment. And as my staff is, and Emma is bringing more chairs, you see that? That's good. See, Caleb, you were right. Welcome. Topic of discussion on Facebook. We have, well, where I am with the old people because I'm old. We have this discussion a lot about this gentrification thing. So I'm glad to see a lot of our neighbors and people on Facebook who talk about this all the time here. So I'm looking for a lively discussion and some answers. No pressure, Doc. No pressure at all. But looking for answers to this wonderful problem that we have encountered in our city. So welcome to Brightside. Housekeeping, if you need to use the restrooms, they are down the hall and to the left. The men's is the first door on the right. The women's is the third door on the right. And if just in case there's someone in there, there are restrooms in the locker rooms. So locker rooms are on the left. So if you have to go to the bathroom and there's somebody in there, there are about a lot of women's rooms. So, you know, men you only get two. Otherwise, thank you for coming. You've parked everywhere, so you're fine. I know your neighbors are probably like, what is going on at Brightside again tonight? Always something, always busy. There are plenty of things going on in here, and I won't bore you with those details. Just check our website, brightsideopportunities.org. Thank you very much, and have a good night. And I would like to next introduce Dr. Wuba next? No. Oh, hi, Dr. Wuba. Thanks for coming. Just saying hi. The president of Millersville University. Thank you. Now, let the
Hello, everyone. I'm Gabrielle Chisholm. I'm a student at Millersville University. We do have a person for Spanish interpretation. Her name is Zara. She's right back there. um, we are delighted to bring this year's Carter G. Woodson Lecture to Brightside Opportunities Center, given their support to all in this community, right in line with Dr. Woodson's work. Millersville is collaborating with Brightside, the City of Lancaster, and the community organizations participating in our panel on the issue of equity in housing. Dr. Woodson devoted his life to highlighting African American contributions, especially ones that advance civil rights. Many of the problems with housing in our community are rooted in racism. Addressing those issues is addressing racial injustice. Millersville University is proud to carry out its public mission of responding to this urgent issue by initiating this forum. Before I introduce the first speaker of the evening, I'm going to share a quote by Dr. Woodson. "We have a wonderful history behind us. It reads like the history of a people in a heroic age. We are going back to that beautiful history, and it is going to inspire us to do greater achievements." Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And now our first speaker of the evening will be Lancaster City Mayor Donn Sarache.
Okay, very good. Good evening, one and all. I am really delighted to see so many people here and to have this conversation tonight. And my job is really to set a foundation for the work that the City of Lancaster is doing, and I'm going to do that with a handful of slides. But first, I want to just thank Brightside for hosting this event tonight. Thank you. I also want to give a shout out to Dr. and the Doctors Wuba, who I appreciate so much the support of Millersville University and your contributions to the vibrancy of the City of Lancaster. Thank you for being here. And there are many familiar faces in the room, but as the mayor of the City of Lancaster, it is such a privilege to work with so many dedicated staff And I just want to acknowledge the staff that are in the room. And so would you just please raise your hands if you work for the City of Lancaster? Okay, there's our team. Thank you again for this opportunity. And so my remarks tonight, again, just are about setting the context for the works that we're doing as it relates to affordable housing and equity. And there are no shortcuts to doing this work. And it is so important and vital that we figure out how to get this right. There are a lot of wrongs to remedy in the city of Lancaster and in many cities across the country. And so let's start with a few slides to help us get the conversation going. Okay, Douglas, I think I'm going to need you to advance. Okay, here we go. So I'd like to start with this visual because the City of Lancaster's vision to build a stronger and more equitable Lancaster block by block is presented. We're presenting here a few of the foundational plans or blocks that will shape the city's work for the next 4 years. And so just why we're saying 4 years is because that's my next term in office. I have an expiration date until the next election, which is 12/31/25. And so that's why we're talking about 4 years. That's the only reason why we're talking about 4 years, because things can change. And, you know, we don't know what the future may hold. But for now, the focus is these 4 initiatives. And they are the city's updated strategic plan, the American Rescue Plan, which will help power our work, our recently released interim housing plan, and the comprehensive plan that will guide the next 20 years of civic life in the city of Lancaster. Next slide, please. So I want to first talk about our strategic plan. There are four pillars to this plan that are part of our block-by-block strategy. And these pillars are strong neighborhoods, safe places, sustainable economy, and sound government. This is the central plan that guides the everyday work of the City of Lancaster. This plan has been refreshed as I entered into my second term as mayor, but these pillars are familiar to those of you who were familiar with the previous strategic plan, but as I said, they have been updated. Next slide. Second, you've probably heard of the American Rescue Plan funds. Here is pictured our council president, Councilman Smith-Waddell, with a resident talking about the American Rescue Plan. The city of Lancaster received $39.5 million, and we're very, very grateful to have this investment. From revenue replacement and historic investments in affordable housing to much, much more on the horizon, these funds are giving us needed fuel to enact our vision. And through community engagement, which is what you see pictured here, we heard 5 top priorities from our residents. And they are affordable housing, behavioral health, homelessness supports, educational disparities, and critical home repair. Now, when we asked residents about their priorities related to the American Rescue Plan Act funds, we didn't provide any limitations on what they could say in terms of their priorities. And why this is important is that the city of Lancaster is not in charge of the behavioral health system and supports that exist in our county. That runs through the county government. We are also, unlike other communities across the country, the school board and the superintendent of the school board is a separate entity from city government. However, we felt it was very important for us to let people say what they needed to say as we were coming out of the pandemic and we're having this conversation. And so we have identified within this list very clearly the need for affordable, safe, and quality housing options, both within our outreach around ARPA as well as the comprehensive plan, which we'll get to in a minute. But next I'd like to talk to you about, next slide, please. I'd like to talk to you about our interim housing strategy goals because, you know, you can't wait for a comprehensive plan or you have to walk and chew gum is kind of how I talk about this. So we couldn't wait until we were all the way through with our comprehensive planning program until to get started on affordable housing, especially when we had this big injection of funds to continue the work forward. So after a recent housing study that was conducted by the Center for Regional Analysis, which is affiliated with our EDC, we know that Lancaster has a housing shortage and that too many families are housing cost burden. I'm not going to ask any of the experts in the room to raise their hand, but any of the students that are here from Millersville, do you know what housing cost burden means? Anybody? Okay, housing cost burden means that you're paying more than 30% of your income towards housing. So let's just say roundabout your income is $1,000 a month. You should not be paying more than $300 a month for your housing. And if you do, you are considered to be housing cost burdened. We know that many families are housing cost burdened. A third of the households and almost half of all renting households. That's a third are housing cost burdened in the city of Lancaster. And that we need to get creative to address housing in our city. Why do we need to get creative? Well, we have 7.3 square miles in the city of Lancaster. There's not green space, undeveloped land to just go and plop down affordable housing units. And we have a plethora of different kinds of zoning uses in the city of Lancaster as well. So this led to the interim housing strategy that was developed by our community planning and economic development team. And this strategy lays out 5 main goals to accomplish by 2026. And these goals are to produce approximately 2,000 new units with 300 affordable units, to protect the existing 14,000 units that exist in the city of Lancaster, to acquire approximately 200 units for affordability-focused redevelopment, and to innovate to create 100 new units, and finally, to sustain the existing affordability and neighborhood vitality already present in our community. And so these strategy goals are not gimmies. Let me be clear that each one of these is going to take a lot of work by our team and many, many partners that exist across the city. Next slide. I also want to just talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we're doing now, which really fall into 4 key program areas to reinvest in affordable housing. And they are critical repair, existing affordable housing rehab, lead hazard control program, and funded new affordable housing. So the city's been trying to prioritize investment in housing in southern Lancaster City. We're not only trying to build new housing, but we also want to make sure that existing housing is affordable, safe, and high quality, which is a massive undertaking in a city with a housing stock as old as ours. And so I just want to note that this map here does not include investments by other partners, nonprofits, or private investors. These are really just dollars that the city, public dollars, has committed to predominantly the south of the city. Now, why are we focusing on the south of the city? Any students know the history of the south of the city in Lancaster? I'll give you a hint. Urban renewal. Anybody? Okay, so here's what I want to say about the south of our city. The south of our city was a major focus of urban renewal. Urban renewal is not something that is unique to Lancaster. Many, many cities across the nation have scars from this federal program that destroyed whole communities and concentrated low-income and high poverty residents in one geographic area. As you might imagine, they are predominantly areas that were built and created by communities of color. What has happened in the southeast of our city is predominantly where the majority of affordable housing is in the city of Lancaster. But as you look across the southeast of the city, where we are currently, you can also see the neglect of reinvestment into properties. Majority rental properties, there is a large extraction economy that is happening in which a lot of money is flowing out of these homes in the form of rental payments, but the money is not flowing back into them in terms of reinvesting as it relates to ensuring that the housing stock is quality and can be sustained. If you drive through the neighborhoods of the city of Lancaster, and predominantly I'm talking to the students that are here tonight, not necessarily to the neighbors, you know and you can see that this housing stock is very old. These are primarily 2.5-ish story brick buildings, many of them with rubber roofs, and the degree to which they have been reinvested in is very obvious as you travel, particularly on foot, and walk through our neighborhoods. So this is why when we have been talking about this plan, the city housing investment map in particular, and the public dollars, they have been primarily flowing to the south of the city because that is where our greatest need is. And so when you look at that map, you can see the preponderance of those dollars that are going to the southeast. In addition, our lead hazard control program is specifically focused on 4 census tracts in the south of the city because that is essential in order to level the playing field such that children are not poisoned and unable to learn and achieve their fullest potential because they have been damaged by lead. And I see some of my partners in the room here who have been working on addressing lead-based hazards in our home. And equity as it relates to safety of housing is paramount in our strategy. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, and then finally there's our comprehensive plan. This is the first plan that the city has undertaken since 1993. And we are currently creating that plan which will guide policy and development over the next 20 years. And this planning process that we call Planning Our Future Lancaster is grounded in community engagement, and a lot of it. Comprehensive plans can address a broad range of topics from land use, housing, equity, transportation, parks, infrastructure, among others. Next slide, please. And the city launched the comprehensive plan engagement process alongside Mayor's Neighborhood Week in June of last year. And this winter and spring, with a team of consultant partners, we're studying housing market conditions and traffic, as well as assessing community feedback and overall city trends. By late spring of this year, we plan to merge all of the community feedback that we've gotten with the technical studies that are being developed by our consultant team to develop a draft land use plan. And by summer, we'll have some draft policies and hopefully be able to adopt this plan in the winter of 22 and 23. Next slide, please. So community engagement has been a critical part of this process, and we have been, the team that's been involved in this has been doing an exceptional job. Our goal is to interact with 10% of city residents, or about 6,000 people. And so far, we've interacted with about 2,000 people in person and online, not including the reach of social media, or radio. And our approach to community engagement is to hear from all community voices and to allow for a diverse and inclusive process, to use interactive and creative techniques, and to go to people in a variety of settings. And we're looking forward to a lot more engagement in the warmer months, and now that COVID is hopefully receding from our county, to be able to have more in-person gatherings. So let's move to the next slide, Douglas. I want to just share a little bit about what the community is saying. So here are some direct quotes from the community, and we've documented thousands of thoughts and comments from city residents, visitors, business people, community leaders, and the amount of community feedback we've gotten is incredible and really demonstrates how much people care about our city. And while we certainly don't agree on everything, there are many common threads here. The top priorities that have emerged are around housing and affordability and making sure current residents can remain in the city. The second is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the third is around safe streets and safe places. And so I leave you with these comments to ground us all in the feedback, just this little snippet of feedback from community residents about the things that are most important to them and what they believe are the priorities for moving forward. And so with that, take it to the next slide. I thank you for the opportunity to share with you a little bit about where we are on the journey today. And it is my great pleasure right now to introduce Dr. Worgs, who is a professor of the Department of Political Science and the program director of the African and African American Studies program at Towson University. We are delighted to have Dr. Worgs here tonight with us. Please, the podium is yours, as they say.
It is really my pleasure to be here. I am honored. I'm really honored to have been invited for the Carter G. Woodson lecture. I've been thinking a lot about Carter G. Woodson lately. Black History Month, I've been talking about him for weeks. And the reason why I'm so honored is because, you know, one of his greatest accomplishments was this connection of, you know, what we think in connecting the academy to the community, right? So the ideas that scholars uncover, the history that historians, you know, weave together and rediscover. It was about representing that to the community, to the people. While I'm not a historian, I'm a political scientist. It's really, I think it's the peak of our impact comes when we're able to share some of our thoughts and ideas with the community. And so, as you'll see, that's kind of the thing for me, supporting communities and residents, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really, really pleased to be here, and I hope that something I say makes it worth your time having come. First off, I want to thank Dr. Caleb Corkery for his work in helping me to come here, inviting me, bringing me here. I really appreciate that. President Wuba, Millersville, I appreciate, you know, your support in inviting me and facilitating this. And I also want to thank Ms. Wallanda McLeod for facilitating this and providing this facility for us to have this conversation. So we're going to talk about affordable housing, but I'm really going to present my vision of something broader than that, right? One of the things about us academics, you know, we'll say we're going to talk about one thing, but you never know what we're going to say, and you don't know where we're going to go, and you don't know how long it's going to take. So, but I'm going to try to be good because I wrote all my comments down because that's supposed to make it go faster, right? But I got so many other good stories other than what's on the paper, so we'll see. The title of my talk is Building Just Communities. Building just communities. What does that even mean? What is a just community? What does that look like? What would that consist of? I think we can start by thinking about, well, we know what unjust communities look like, right? We know that. We've seen those. Many of us live in them. So we could start by just saying, we know we don't want that, we want something else. But I guess we should present a picture of what we would like to see. The picture that I paint, it's going to be a pretty quickly presented picture, and then I'll get into some of the details of how we can get there. But the picture that I want to paint is not of an ideal. This is not like a fantasy land. This is not some great utopia. The picture I want to present is something that's very achievable, right? In fact, the picture, what I think what a just community looks like is really what many people already experience. There are millions of people who experience what we would think of as kind of a just existence in where they live, right? But there's some people who don't. In fact, and in some communities, many people don't. In some communities, most people don't have this experience. So that's what I want to paint that picture, and then we'll talk about some of the characteristics of this just community, some of the impediments or the obstacles to getting there, and then and I'll share some thoughts on how we might get there. So, let's see this. Let's hope this works. Okay. What would a just community look like? We can go on to the next one. All right. I don't know if you guys may not be able to read that, but so I've got like 8 or 9 different items of what a just community would look like, and I'm going to focus in on about 3 of them because I think they'll help us in processing the conversation for the rest of today, as well as some of the things that I think we should prioritize moving forward. A just community would be a place where all residents, would have access to decent, affordable housing. Decent, affordable housing. A just community would be a place where residents would have access to a decent job that pays a family-sustaining wage. Residents would have access to quality schools. They would have access to the basic needs like food, childcare, quality, affordable health care, clean water. Right? That's not too much to ask. Next slide, let's see. Well, I'm going backwards. There we go. In such a community, residents would be safe and they would feel safe from crime. They would really be safe and they would also feel safe. Residents would have a mutually respectful and trusting relationship with law enforcement. Residents would be neighbors. There's so much I could say about that. I had to wrap it up in one word: neighbors. By that I mean the people in this community would be connected. They would be embedded within social networks of mutual support, and you wouldn't have the levels of isolation that we see in some places. And some social scientists talk about, we call that social capital, right? Where people are woven together through institutions, organizations, and there's a level of interpersonal trust. So I just sum it up by saying people would be neighbors. That's kind of ideal. Residents would live in a clean and healthy environment. And lastly, this community would be an inclusive democracy where residents have the opportunity to participate in the decisions that impact their lives. Okay. So there are 3 of those items that I've mentioned that I'm going to talk about in a little more detail, because we'll see some things when we focus in on them. And you'll also see what my priorities are. We could add other things to this list. You might have a different list than I do, but I think this is a start, right? And again, I think there are many people whose lived experience looks a lot like the list I just gave. My lived experience today is a lot like that. You know, I live in the suburban Baltimore, got decent housing, decent wages, you know, fairly safe. I can participate politically in almost anything, you know, in the decisions that I care about. So I kind of had that experience. So I know it's not impossible. But there's some people in my community who don't, right? And there are some communities not very far from where I live in which most people don't have that experience, right? And dare I say that there's some communities where nobody has that experience, nothing even close, right? And so that's what we need to be focused on. How do we build just communities where everyone can have this experience of decent housing, decent access to a decent job that pays a family-sustaining wage, you know, they feel safe, they have positive relationships with law enforcement, access to their basic needs, and are part of an inclusive democracy, right? We need to be able to create that. So let me focus in on those 3 items. The 3 I want to touch on a little bit more, first off, is affordable housing. So I like to be really precise with my words. Sometimes they're intentionally vague, but I want to emphasize access to decent, affordable housing. So the mayor did a great job in talking about, you know, affordability, cost burden. I'm glad I don't have to define that. She gave some of the statistics around the numbers of folks who can't afford their housing. Roughly almost half of renters are cost burdened in this city. That's pretty much what it is nationally. About a third of residents in the United States are cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their salary. There's a large portion are what they call severely cost burdened, where they're paying 50% or more of their salary. So there is an affordability crisis. There's a shortage of affordable housing, right? There are a lot of folks who can't afford their housing. And then we know there are thousands of folks who are homeless, right? So there's an affordability crisis. But again, there's more to this, though, than affordability. In Baltimore, for many years, I used to, it's not funny, but it's sort of like, it's ironic. There wasn't really an affordable housing crisis in Baltimore for some years. There was lots of affordable housing, but the housing was, no one would want to live in it, right? And just substandard, decrepit housing. So that were decent affordable housing. So people need access to decent affordable housing. And the decent is intentionally vague because that's going to conform to your standards in your community, right? So access to decent affordable housing is one of the elements of a just community. The second point I want to touch on a little bit more is access to a decent job with a family-sustaining wage. Again, I'm trying to be really conscious with the wording. Access to a decent job with a family-sustaining wage. What do we mean by access, right? First of all, how do I have access to a decent job? First, that means I have to have the skills that would allow me to get this decent job with a family-sustaining wage. That's one way that there's access, right? Also, it might be that the job that I have the skills for pays a decent wage. You see those are kind of two different ways. And then the third way that this is important, again, access. If I have the skills for a job that pays a decent wage, I need to be able to get to that job, right? One of the things I've been seeing a lot lately, we've been talking about it among some folks in and around Baltimore, is the level of isolation. Some folks in certain communities can't get to the decent jobs, right? Some social scientists will call this the spatial mismatch, right? The folks who need the jobs are over here, the folks who need the jobs are over here, the jobs they need are over there, right? I live on the east side, I need a job, but the jobs are on the west side. Can I get to the west side? In Baltimore, it's a little bigger than Lancaster, so it's a tougher ask. But the point here is that access to a decent job is not, it's having the skills to get a job that pays well, or getting the pay for the jobs that you can get. And it also means that you can get to those jobs. This brings us back to the first point about affordable housing. And this is something I would hope you all will discuss. Where is the affordable housing, right? And where is that affordable housing in relationship to the jobs that people need, right? So location matters. And so access to a decent job is dependent on where you can live. And it's a challenge if we can only live here and we can't get to there. And if the jobs aren't in our community, then we need to have an efficient and effective transportation system. In fact, I could add that as another item, an efficient transportation system. But we're here to talk about affordable housing, and I don't want to go on too long. So I'm going to slip some other things into my list. See, that's how we do it. The third point that I wanted to touch on again in terms of elements of a just community is an inclusive democracy, right? Where people can participate in an inclusive democracy. Interestingly, I want you to think about that a little bit. An inclusive democracy, participatory democracy, democratic participation, where people, the just community has pathways for residents to be able to participate in the decisions that they care about. Now, I would like us to think about this element as not just a desired end, but also a means, right? So inclusive democracy is not just an end that you're striving for. It's also the means of getting to the other things that you want, right? So if you have an inclusive democracy, then maybe you don't make some of the decisions that were made in the past, right? If you've got an inclusive democracy, then the collective wisdom of the community can be brought to bear, and you probably get much better outcomes. So this idea of an inclusive democracy is as I said, it's both ends and it's means, and this is a necessary element if you're trying to build a just community. Okay, let's see. I just forgot all about it. Thank you. Thank you. So the next question is, why don't we have just communities? Right? Why don't we have just communities? All right. Why don't we have justice in our communities? Right. So I'm going to point out 5 obstacles to having just communities. And you may not be able to see these pictures. I was trying to think what would be some good pictures to highlight the points I'm making around these 5 obstacles. I only had 2 pictures for the first 2. So, but the first one is, the first obstacle is past policy decisions, right? The mayor said earlier, she talked about, urban renewal, right? The policy decisions that basically set the stage for how we're going to live. And so one thing, the challenges that we see today did not just happen. They're in part the product of past decisions, right? So this is a major obstacle to us, getting to this just community, these past decisions. And so that's one thing we need to be aware of and we need to be conscious of. The picture there is of the famous highway to nowhere in Baltimore City. And some of you might know the story of this. It was a highway that was supposed to be built. 70 was supposed to be brought into the city from the west side. They demolished a stable black neighborhood, a significant portion of a stable black neighborhood. They built like 1.5 miles of the highway, but by that time, the folks on the east side of the city were so mobilized and they were able to stop the highway, but not before all these people lost their homes, right? And so you have this stretch, it's 40 now. Did you drive in? I didn't know what it was when I first drove. I'm like, why is there a highway for like 1 mile? It doesn't go anywhere, right? And then I learned the story, and it's notorious, right? And this is like 50 years ago. People remember it. It's still impacting the community today. Divides the community, right? So past policy decisions, urban renewal, transportation decisions, where roads are built, where schools are built, zoning decisions, all these decisions that have been made set the stage for how we live now. And so that's one key obstacle, the past decisions that we've made. All right. A second key obstacle, this is a more complicated one, the functioning of our free market economy. The picture there is of Washington, D.C. You see all the cranes in the background. There's lots of money flowing in because there's lots of money to be made. I'm not going to give a Marxist critique of capitalism, but you don't have to be a Marxist to understand that profit maximization or profit maximizing activity makes it really hard to produce affordable housing. If I'm a builder and I'm trying to maximize my profit, then I'm gonna build the things that make me the most money, right? And oftentimes that's not affordable housing. If I'm a landlord, I'm going to try to have the rents as high as possible because I need to maximize my profit. So this is a major obstacle to folks having access to affordable housing if you're operating within this, profit maximizing context, right? And we all know this, by the way. We know that the number one producers of affordable housing tend to be what? Nonprofit organizations, right? Or for-profit businesses who are forced to do it by government or get extraordinary incentives, right? So we know that the regularly functioning market economy does not produce the housing that we need, right? It does produce some of the challenges that we face, right? So folks were talking about gentrification, right? So that picture actually came up when I was looking up gentrification in DC. So gentrification, as we I think most of us have heard, is this process of wealthier folks moving into communities that had been either low income or moderately income folks, made up of low income or moderately income folks. The challenge is that when those wealthier folks come in, it changes the dynamic of the community. Rents go up, right? Other costs go up. It becomes harder for many people to live in these communities, right? It becomes harder to find an apartment or a house because you're competing with folks with a lot more money. And in a profit maximizing context, if I'm a seller, I'm going to sell to the highest bidder, right? I'd like you to stay in my neighborhood, but you know what? This person over here is going to pay me 3 times what you can pay, so sorry, you got to move to the west side, right? So that market economy creates challenges, right? Many argue it leads to displacement of folks from their communities. So that's another major obstacle to us having a just community. The third is racism. And this is my first time mentioning it, right? But racism is all throughout everything I've been talking about, right? Racism shapes those decisions that we talk, those past policy decisions. Not all the bad decisions were due to racism, but many of them were, right? Racism shapes the way we see communities. Racism shapes the policy priorities that leadership focuses on. Racism shapes the market dynamic, right? Because there's a racialized valuation that goes on in terms of the property values, right? So racism it amplifies the first two things, and it also does some other things beyond that, right? Racism makes it difficult for us to collectively work together to solve the problems that we have, right? It's hard for us to come together and collaborate because of these racial differences, and in times of increased hostility or tension, it gets even that much more difficult. So that's another major obstacle to us having just communities. And then the last two are a little different. These are kind of me and my political science friends. This is what we say, right? For a lack of a political will, right? The lack of political will. Those first three things I listed, past policy decisions, the market economy, racism, they make it really, really difficult to solve the issues that we care about. Affordable housing, for example. It's really hard just based on those three things. So you need tremendous political will in order to do it. And so if you don't have the political will, then you're not going to do it, right? And so the lack of political will, I think, is another major obstacle. So we want to think about ways to build that political will, right? And then number 5, the lack of capacity. This is another interesting one. This is, again, another political sciencey thing. By capacity, we mean the capacity to address these issues. So even if we have the will, if we know we want to do it, do we have the capacity to do it? Well, part of capacity is resources. That goes without saying. Do we have the money? Do we have enough money to kind of do the things we want to do? Can we access funds to do it? So that's oftentimes the hardest, but also the easiest to understand. We need money to do it. But then there's something that I learned from my teacher and colleague, Clarence Stone, who wrote a book many years ago called Building Civic Capacity. Civic capacity. And what Clarence was doing, he was looking at big city school systems and the difficulty they had reforming, the difficulty there was in reforming big city school systems to actually serve their students' needs. And he presented this argument that part of the challenge was that these communities, these cities needed to build the civic capacity in order to address these major challenges. And his argument was that when you're dealing with something like that, you need to be able to, I'm going to read, because it's such a complicated concept. I found the right way to say it when I was preparing for today. When you're dealing with something that's a potentially controversial topic, you need to be able to mobilize the community's resources. You need to be able to get the elites as well as the grassroots folks to be able to work together in a sustained manner to address those concerns. And because it's controversial, that makes it really hard to stay together, right? And so this civic capacity is that ability to weave together this coalition in a sustained manner to pursue this objective of producing whatever it is you're trying to produce, right? I couldn't find it, but I think I got it out. Okay. All right. So the lack of capacity is another major impediment. All right. I'm almost done. So, how do we build just communities? How do we do it? So how do we build just communities, okay? Well, we got to address those things that I mentioned. We need to dismantle racism, right? And the way there's a lot of discussion about that. There's a lot of discussions around equity, and I agree with much of what's being said. Maybe I don't agree with all of it, but I agree with much of it. I think much of it is sincere. I don't know that all of it is sincere, but much of it is sincere. We need efforts at racial equity that are sincere, that are prioritized, that are supported by resources, right? And that hold folks accountable, right? Hold people accountable to do the things that we say need to be done. We need to undo the past policy decisions that are damaging to communities. And if you can't undo it, at least stop making the same kinds of decisions, right? And then third, this is a tricky one. So we need to consciously try to navigate the challenges posed by our market economy, right? This is a little more somewhat theoretical. Capitalism is not going anywhere anytime soon, right? For many of you who are socialists, I'm sorry to say that, but it's not soon, right? So you have to navigate it. How do we deal with this? Well, one path would be to seek to expand spaces and initiatives that exist outside of the profit maximizing market, right? So, for example, housing cooperatives might be something that we could look to as a means of producing affordable housing or protecting affordable housing, right? Alternative ways of ownership. I met someone in Baltimore, and they were talking. They had a vision, a model of. They were going to use the housing co-op model to purchase multiple row homes for residents in a particular neighborhood. It sounded like a really interesting idea. I'm not sure where it's gone to yet because they told me about this about a year and a half, 2 years ago. But I don't know if it's worked or if it's going to work. But those are the kinds of ideas we need to come up with. We need to be creative in how we navigate the forces of the market. It's not going anywhere, but we can maybe expand those spaces that are not necessarily trapped by market forces. Housing cooperatives, community land trusts, in terms of housing and protecting affordable housing, worker cooperatives, right? Employee-owned enterprises as ways of protecting good-paying jobs, right? Keeping them from leaving the communities. So those are three steps towards building a just community. But the fourth step, is what I'm really most. This is what I'm most excited about and what I think we need to really think about. And that returns us to this concept of inclusive democracy. I think that, as I said, democratic participation is both a means and an end. Democratic participation will help deal with the other things. That will help us resolve the issue of the kinds of decisions that are being made. It will help us, create urgency and prioritize alternatives to market, to relying on the market to provide affordable housing. Right? If the people are mobilized and and their voices are heard and they can put pressure on their leaders, then they can force the leaders to say, okay, we will try to find ways to produce affordable housing outside of this market. Right? Maybe we can have policies that support housing cooperatives, right, and things like that. But beyond that, I'm most excited about the prospects for communities when they try to tap the potential of their residents, creating vehicles that allow residents to express their voices, creating vehicles and opportunities for residents to participate in shaping the future for their cities and their communities. To me, that is the most important thing. And then creating opportunities for people to actually contribute their efforts to making this happen. That to me is essential in terms of producing and building just communities. I think I'm just about out of time, but yeah, I think I'm about out of time. So I'll wrap up by saying this, that I think it's possible. The vision that I presented is not perfect. It's not, a utopia. This is it's the way many people live. And I think more people can have that experience if if collectively we focused and worked on that together, and collaboratively, collectively, I think we could do it. So thank you very much for allowing me to share those thoughts.
Absolutely. Community engagement exercise, okay. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Douglas Smith. I'm the Chief Planner for the city. It's an honor to be here with you all. I just wanted to draw your attention to one thing. You might have noticed when you sat down in your chair, there were index cards in your chair. So there are a few questions that the panelists will be asking, and we would like to hear your responses to those questions too. So you have a pen and you have 3 index cards. Please take the time to jot down your own thoughts or maybe things that you hear from tonight's conversation that resonate with you. There are 3 boards in the back of the room that correspond to each of those questions, and we'd love to have you go and pin those ideas on that board at any time during the evening, but especially before you leave tonight, please make sure to do that. This is one of the ways that we try to engage our communities in the events that we help plan. So we really thank you in advance for all of the input that you'll give and will impact our comprehensive planning effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. My name is Tracy Wise, and I'm in the History Department at Millersville University. And it's my happy job to keep our conversation on track tonight. So I'm going to allow the panelists 1 minute to get started. We'll come back to you. A minute to introduce, maybe 2, but no more than 2, to introduce yourself and your organization. And we'll just start right here with Dr. Danielle Brown.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Dr. Danielle Brown. I am representing the NAACP. Our focus is to work to disrupt inequality, dismantle racism, and accelerate change in key areas, which housing is one. But I also want to name, in less than a minute, that I am a resident of Lancaster City, have been for the past 43 years. So this is near and dear to my heart.
I'm getting my timer out. Jake, go ahead.
I am the SOE director with Tenfold. Tenfold's a nonprofit. Its mission is to spark the power in all people to achieve equitable housing and financial security. SOE is a place-based community development initiative focused on the southwest part of the city here.
Paul.
My name is Paul Colbreth, lifelong resident of Lancaster City, southeast area. Presently, I'm retired. I just need to make sure that's out there. And I'm currently the president of our NAN organization, National Action Network, Lancaster chapter. And we are a social justice organization that is, our focus is on social justice issues pertaining to housing and quality of life issues in Lancaster community. And directed at Black and brown people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Milsey Carrasco. I'm the Director of Neighborhood Engagement for the City of Lancaster. I also lived in the City of Lancaster and I'm a graduate of J.P. McCaskey. I was actually, Danielle, Dr. Brown and I were classmates. And so really excited to be here and to talk about this very important topic. I love your message, Doctor. The focus of our department is really ensuring the democratic process through equitable engagement. So I really resonated with a lot of the information you were sharing, so thank you.
Okay, Douglas has already warned you that we have 3 questions that we're going to engage with. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I wasn't sure if we were going to get 2 for 1 there. Sorry.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Dalps. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development for the City of Lancaster. It's really encouraging to see so many attendees at the event tonight. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to lead a number of really important functions for the city, including a small Bureau of Health, a Bureau of Housing Inspections and Code Compliance. We also are responsible for what we call community development, which is largely federal grants. We also manage city planning and building codes as well. So it's a lot under that umbrella, but those topics fit together. Also want to say thank you, Dr. Worgs, for the presentation tonight. I think you may be a city planner in your at your night job, because a lot of the things that you presented we think about on a regular basis, including a number of my team members here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we can already tell there's a lot of Lancaster proud people here in the audience tonight, and this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate our civic capacity. So we want to start with the first question, which is, I'm going to amend it on the fly here in light of Dr. Worgs' presentation. What does decent, affordable, and equitable housing look like in Lancaster? Because he's already told us that decent is a local option. So I'm going to ask you now to talk to somebody that you're sitting near, and I'm going to encourage you to talk to somebody who you didn't come into the room with to answer that question. What does decent, affordable, and equitable housing look like in Lancaster?
Well, Chris, what does that look like for you?
You got the answer?
No.
You got the answer?
No. How's this format goes? When they're done talking,
I think we get an opportunity to ask our answer, and then there's like,
well, I can say
Kale told me before, he's like, if everyone doesn't have an answer, that's fine.
no, so we can say anything right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think
It might be quality. You got to measure that by how many housing violence. It's always good. That's our response.
yeah.
Or just talk about affordable housing. In terms of non-technical, we don't talk about the issue. That it's really about how to. I just maybe a question answer to the first question. It's really about housing perspective, diversity, housing,
First question, like, what does it look like? What does it look like physically?
housing.
It could be anything. It could be a single-family house. It could be a high-rise. It could be an apartment. And it's important that it doesn't really look like
It has to be a place where people are safe, comfortable, healthy, thriving, and that they are not, that it's habitable. You know, their quality of life is not compromised.
Yeah, so that for me, it extends not only where people are living, but to the the surroundings, so that helps quality. So I put down affordable housing. I think it's really important for private-public partnerships, for to be working together to resolve it.
And I think the questions are in the same, right?
You know what I mean? So we're working with public and private partnerships, and then where people appreciating what this housing advocates are saying, same thing. I think encourage the building of partnerships. Because that will release some of the pressure. That's good stuff.
Sometimes I
still do housing until those other partnerships.
We agree, and there's a lot of people that can't disagree with that philosophy, but this is truly a supply issue, and if you can take some, I always think, like, if you can take some of the pressure off by building a higher, and also
Okay, I hate to interrupt you, but I will. I hate to interrupt you, but I will. One more time. Some of you have already gotten your Girl Scout cookies. You may know this is the sign for quiet. It's a nonviolent sign for quiet. I would love to say that we can hear from everybody in the room, but obviously we don't have time for that. We'd be here till next week at least, Yolanda. No, she's in the front row, and we know when we have to leave. But we're going to make her happy because she wants lively discussion, at least a few answers. So let's have just a couple ideas about what decent, affordable housing in Lancaster might look like. Anybody? Now, don't be shy like our Millersville students were. Yes?
My partner here said it should look like any other housing, and I thought that was really interesting.
It should look like any other housing. Good. Anybody else? There was a pretty heavy buzz there going on. Yes, sir.
As a Millersville student, I'm kind of in the same realm of actually being a burden thing that I've always like honored and always admired with like good landlords is the actual equitable communication in that sense. And I know like a lot of people, I come from Coachville specifically, and with like Section 8 housing down in Coachville, the actual landlords don't communicate as much.
Okay, effective communication. Again, part of building this inclusive democracy, that's foundational. Anybody else? How about folks on this side of the room? Now you know you all have something to say. LaRock's gonna come and help you out there. If he needs to. Don't make him come over to you. Don't make him. And I think this notion of rebuilding, obviously, from what the mayor said earlier, we don't have unlimited space in Lancaster, and we have to kind of work with what we have in terms of that. We've time for one more in the back. Yes, sir. Yep, you.
Yeah, to modify or amend the zoning laws so that they are not so open to gentrification. That's key. Once you take, for example, farming land and you change zoning, is dead. That's happening in Manhattan Township, where I come from. We have right now an issue with that in Grandview Heights. Zone that even you cannot build, but they approve it as for development. Everything is the money first, second, and third.
Yeah.
And that has to stop. And we need political power to overcome that also. And that needs a lot of courage from everybody and the politicians. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to turn it over to the panel and have folks respond to what you heard and to what your community organization, your city organization is doing to help move us towards decent, affordable housing. Anyone? Paul?
I guess I can start. First and foremost, I've had the darndest time trying to differentiate between the wording of affordable housing, equitable housing, and now new workforce housing. So, it's been tough for me and our organization.
Good thing you're retired, Paul.
Yes. So this past year, we were introduced to those three phrases, and sometimes I hear, even tonight, that they use them interchangeably. Yeah, and nobody has even came up with a real solid answer to what they each are. So, and the one thing that we and Nan wanted to bring forth tonight is that you can't talk on this issue unless you deal with the elephant in the room. And that gentleman spoke of it, which is gentrification. And we have a whole committee that's actually focusing on gentrification and how it's impacting our black and brown communities. We look at gentrification as one of the, if not the most important issue now that's affecting our community. So what we are doing right now in our committee is, but we've been putting a spotlight on gentrification. We've identified and are trying to identify those individuals, groups, or whatever that are complicit in gentrification of our community. And then we're trying to look at whether, and when I say complicit, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, it's happening in our community. And finally, we like to develop ways of combating it. And a question that, again, I would put forth to folks here to address amongst themselves is who's responsible for bringing this issue to the table and addressing it, because we've been talking to community members, political officials, and stakeholders about these issues. And we're trying to let them know that when you look at gentrification at 30,000 feet, it looks entirely different than when you're looking at gentrification at 5 or 10 feet. And so that's where we're at.
That's great, Paul. That's actually our third question.
Oh.
So we're gonna hold on to that. Other folks on the panel, responses. Danielle?
So when Dr. Ward mentioned the word decent, it disrupted my piece a lot because it's relative. And he spoke to that, but I think the bigger part around it is who's defining it. And so that's the hard part, because decent is defined for me, not with me. And when we want to talk about how we create systems within our community, it would be decentering voices that have been in power for so long and start centering the people that are impacted, like the man spoke in the back, center his voice. But that's not the systems and the structures that we have created. And so when we look to define these words, affordable housing and decent, it really has to start with decentering the voice of power. And I would argue, and not here to start with you, Dr. Ward, but I would argue that racism is so intertwined between the fabric of everything, it isn't functioning in isolation. And so we need to really think that through, because white's a power construct, right? Like, so that's what happens. And so everything weaves within that. And until we start decentering that, we're going to cycle back, because gentrification, I would argue, isn't really a new thing, right? It was the redlining back in the day. It was, here, y'all live in a shack, we live on a plantation. There's not much of a difference, and so we need to really think through those things at a deeper level.
Dr. Brown, okay.
She was my African American studies.
I knew Danielle when. Anybody else up in the front of the room? Yeah, go ahead.
Happy to take a quick shot at this just from a city planning perspective. I think that affordable and equitable is different than decent, so I think we need to talk about those separately. When I think about affordable and equitable, I really focus in on housing that is providing a diversity of building types and a diversity of housing, housing that's serving a diversity of incomes. So that's usually how I think about it in terms of affordable and equitable. There's another part of our shop that focuses on decent. I actually really like the term decent, but I will say among our halls, we're usually using the words safe, healthy housing, quality housing. And Millsy asked me a great question, like how do you define that aspirationally and how do you define that technically? So aspirationally, I would say it is a space where the members of those household can flourish, that they're not held back by the quality of that housing. The technical answer, also coming from, I manage housing code officials, is we look for violations in the home. So we hold rental property owners accountable and make sure that that rental housing is kept at a certain standard.
Thank you. Jake, anything?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think the quick definition I've heard for decent is safe, dry, and warm. But again, to Chris's point, that doesn't leave a lot to, it kind of leaves a lot to the imagination, right? Like safe, dry, and warm is kind of this very baseline, but, and same thing with like code compliant. It can be, a house can be code compliant, but there could be a lot of things that are wrong or that would not be a great place to raise a family, or you wouldn't want to raise your family there. I'd also mention that affordable housing, again, is different. It's subjective, right, to what your level of entry is. Are you looking to rent or are you looking to buy, right? Affordable housing is kind of this continuum of the housing, right, where people are entering at different points. And we want to, I think, providing access to entry into that housing continuum at different points is essential too. We must think of if you're a renter that wants to grow their wealth, grow their equity to purchase their first home, but that path is not there, we need to create those pathways in the community as well. So I don't want to just kind of pigeonhole affordable housing as just like thinking of really low income housing. It's kind of affordable to you.
So I think we go back to something that Dr. Worgs said. There's a lot going on, that housing is part of a much, much bigger picture. And so in some ways we might imagine that we're in a situation where there's two forces that are powerful, that are kind of heading and intersecting and colliding. And one of those forces is the one that Paul talked about, which is the force of gentrification. But we also have the force of developing affordable housing. And those are kind of sometimes parallel, sometimes intersecting, sometimes complementary, sometimes conflictual and competing. So I guess the next question, really, question number 2, is initially for the panel and then for the rest of us, which is as we move towards what we're calling is affordable, decent housing, equitable, all those different words, how do we address the needs of, I'm going to expand the question a little bit, of low-income families in particular, but also not only low-income families, how do we protect, address the needs and protect the most vulnerable members of our community? People whose voices have not been heard.
Oh, that's
I'm
me.
just
Oh,
giving
you're
an example. Like one example.
Like, wow, that's a good question. So I would start with programming, right? And so within the work that we do and the opportunities that we have to serve, it's really important. So I do want to reference the earlier question real fast. So we were focused on the interior part of the home. The surrounding of the home is really important. And so when we're talking about a healthy home, it's also the front porch, right? It's also the neighbors. It's also access to services, that corner store, the bodega that has the gallon of milk. So it goes a little bit beyond just what, once you open your door and you shut that door. And so now that I've shared that, really the substandard housing and how we can really support the needs of low-income families, it's about our partnerships. And it's about having and building really strong relationships. The private-public partnerships are so important. And one of our neighborhoods here in the southern part of the city, the southeast, has the richest amount of social services in their neighborhoods. And we were actually doing an asset mapping project a couple of years ago. And it's fascinating to see and speak to community members and ask them, what is it that you love so much about your neighborhood? And the number one thing, when we were speaking to them, it was about the social services, the faith-based organizations that were there, the walkability to good food sources, the friends, the neighbors, that quality of life. And for me, the most important thing for providing these services for low-income families is about those resources, those partnerships in the community.
Thank you, Rosie. Jake, is that something you want to address?
Sure, yeah. I'll just say we have to intentionally create pathways, I guess, for residents to access the system, right? And the system being the democracy that Dr. Worgs was talking about, but also the system of kind of the wealth generation of home ownership and housing, right? So intentionally creating programs that go out to the community, give residents the ability to learn, to grow, to understand how to participate in the system, but also gain those skills so they can move up the ladder in kind of through the housing continuum. Yeah.
Okay. Paul, anything else?
No, I don't want to discount what Ms. Millsy said about the availability of social services, but the availability of social services in the Southeast community is not what it was, because when you had those organizations that were there, folks could come to those organizations and get help, immediate help. Now it's a bureaucratic process, and even to get a porch fixed, they have to go through so much that they rather just turn and walk away. So whatever happened, they just plucked those social services because they were, I guess I call it low-hanging fruit. Urban leagues, the Christmas attics, the gathering places. These are where people used to go to get answers and help. And it's not there because the funding's not there.
Danielle?
Yes.
I'm going to go back to Dr. Worgs. We want to clap for Paul, though. Wait. I want to go back to Dr. Words when he kept on talking about the idea of this inclusive democracy. And then it's making me think of, we're looking for the answer, right? But we're back to, Audre Lorde said the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so we're here trying to unpack something that is his historical pattern with the same cycle of thinking. So I don't necessarily have the answer of it, but I'm just going to say we need to think about it differently. Because we've created policies, and then there was a loophole in it, right? So all those things are great, but that idea of inclusive democracy, I think if we unpack that and decentered voices, the voices of power around it, we may be on to something, like this collective responsibility in conversations, in common definitions and decision making, that would lead us to do something that's never been done before, because I don't know that we've solved the gentrification problem. We can look at big cities and we can see that they haven't. They may have been little wins, but the collective win hasn't happened yet.
Okay. I'm going to give you a minute to jot down on your card your responses to question number 2 that we've just been discussing, so you have something to put on the board, and then we'll move on to our third and final question.
We're in a group conversation.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Jake, we're not neighbors as well. No, what I want to say about when I became mayor, I thought, Tim wants to take a picture. Okay. I'm like, what do you do? When I became mayor, I thought,
Okay, our third and final
I'm
question.
Mayor, I don't know. I'm just me. I'm just who I
Our
am.
third and final question is really a question that summarizes a lot of what we've talked about tonight. Getting back to the G word, gentrification.
Oh my gosh. I am.
You're the man.
And I know. And I'm not.
So, a panel ready for this?
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Our last question. What are the responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of each of us? When I say each of us, what I mean is the city, the investors and developers, the nonprofits and community-led organizations, the tenants, the property owners, the residents of the city. What is our responsibility in maintaining equitable, affordable, decent housing, and in the midst of that, addressing the problem of gentrification? So, Paul pointed it out early on, Dr. Works pointed it out as well, Danielle mentioned it too. What do we do about gentrification? What do we do? What do each of us do? And what do we expect others to do? What are the responsibilities of the various sectors in our community? Because it's not a problem that any one sector on its own can address and solve. What can the city do? What do we ask or demand of other partners as well? What do we expect from investors and developers? Do we give them a lot of free tax money? What about the folks who live in the houses? What are their rights and responsibilities? What about the nonprofits and other community-led organizations? Anybody want to take that one on to get us started? We have a couple minutes left of our time that we've been allotted here at this wonderful space.
I think we should curb capitalism. What I'm saying is, okay, right now, like 2019, Lancaster City's median income was about $23,000. So, that being said, right now, houses are costing about $200 in the southeast. And then when somebody buys, takes a abandoned house, rehabs it, they might buy the house for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. The house is going for sale for $200,000. So that's capitalism, right there. We need to curb that. It's
give the person that's low income a chance to buy that house. What the salaries that they make here in Lancaster is $12, $13, $14. They'll never be able to afford a $200,000 house. So gentrification, that puts them out and brings somebody else in to buy the house.
I think it's a good example of the profit maximizing, impulse of capitalism. We can kind of confront it directly, or we can find ways around it, perhaps. Okay, over there. Yes.
I think kind of the building block upon which we can improve as a society, which will improve a lot of these ills of society, is the understanding that every single person, regardless of their race, religion, criminal history, background, deserves the dignity of housing. And I don't know if we're quite there yet. Like, genuinely everyone believes, no matter what you are, you deserve housing.
Right.
And I think that's a good first step for our culture, is to think like, I don't care if you're black, brown, convict, no matter what you are, you deserve to have a safe place to grow.
Which involves moving from a shift of housing as a commodity, which is kind of how it works. We have time for one more comment. I'm going to give the panel a minute total, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Worgs at the end. We'll give him the last word. Yes.
The question is, the elderly people in our community, they're the ones who are being moved out. And the homes that they spent all their years, 40, 50, 60 years, in those homes that need some repair, where's the city helping that out?
Okay, anybody on the panel? Mayor, you wanted to say you haven't?
Sure. We have, 2 minutes for probably the most complex topic on the planet?
Oh, because we want people to come back to the next meeting. That's why we asked.
Oh, my goodness. So I'll just touch the elephant at one spot here. The first thing I'll say is I want to go back to a theme that came up earlier about not making the same mistakes of the past. And I think in order to do that, you actually have to have a good analysis and understanding of what is happening, what are the conditions in our community. So as part of the comprehensive plan, one of the things that we're doing is we're taking a look at an index of change in the city by geography. And I won't go through all the criteria, but there are a number of different criteria to understand how those changes are happening or have happened in the neighborhoods. The idea then is that you can then pair policy or programs to where you're seeing that happening most acutely. So I'll say that, and I'll put that on the shelf for a second. I'll also say that the the interim housing strategy, which is the first time we've done this in the city, that the mayor talked about this. It's on the website, the city website, take a look at it. One of the things that we focus on in the framework of this document is indicating that we really want to focus on additional affordable rental units in the northern quadrants of the city. And we want to focus on protecting existing homeowners and facilitating new homeowners, especially in the southern quadrants of the city. Those are good goals in all parts of the city, but we've experienced the challenges are different in different quadrants of the city. So some might ask, why are you going to invest public money in more affordable units in the northern quadrants of the city? I'll tell you, because we hardly have any affordable units in the northern quadrants of the city. So if you actually want to affirmatively further fair housing, you need affordable rental units in the northern quadrants of the city. And you also need that wealth building in the southern quadrants of the city, which a number of our panelists have spoken to. So I cannot solve the gentrification issue or speak to all parts of it, but I do think that those are a few important elements.
Okay, I'm going to give you another minute to on your card for question number 3 as Dr. Worgs walks back here to the podium.
Well, in terms of, I've been processing what folks were saying and listening and thinking about what this gathering reminds me of, and what other kinds of processes that I've seen or studied or read about in the past. So I'm actually very excited about this discussion. One of the, I guess, when we talk about inclusive democracy, one of the ideas that emerged in recent decades was this notion of deliberative democracy, right? Where you get people together and they deliberate on what path they should take collectively. Like what policy should we choose? But then the key to deliberative democracy is not just that everybody comes in and says what they want, and then there's a decision. It doesn't really work like that. It's that we collectively try to figure out what's the best thing to do, especially when it comes to complicated issues like affordable housing, right? And so the task is, if you can get the people to commit to participating in this process over time, where you can wrestle with ideas, because what I think is the case might not be the case, or we also can't just talk to the people we agree with. We got to be able to get some folks who disagree into the room and wrestle with the issues. If we can all collectively say, yes, this is an issue, how do we address it? And then over time, we can either come up with a consensus of a strategy, or at least the folks who oppose us may not be so, they may not be so resistant to us, right? When they understand the legitimacy of what we need to do. And so in terms of wrapping up, I think what I've been thinking is that I hope this is just the first or the current step, and that there will be additional steps, and that many of you will continue to participate in this conversation. Because what I said before about that, that civic capacity, I mean, this is a perfect example of the emergence of the building of civic capacity to take on a complex challenge. And you all understand the issue. You know more about it than anyone outside. You know the neighborhoods. You know the concerns that people have. But you also know the potential challenges and tensions between communities, et cetera, et cetera. But you can work it out if people can commit to working together collaboratively to solve it. The last thing I'll say, and this is what gives me hope, not just for Lancaster, but kind of I'll get sappy. Hope for America, right? Is this? A lot of scholars and theorists, many of us agree that the key to a vibrant democracy is really like local action, local folks getting together to solve practical problems, right? You can't, when you got to deal with something real, you can't get caught up in your ideological positions. You can't get caught up in your party identity. Look, we got to deal with this traffic problem. We got to deal with this with this issue that's right before us. And so we get beyond we get beyond not only our ideologies, we get beyond the images, we get beyond the hot takes. We get to really working on concrete issues. And the interesting thing that happens is, first, we might agree with people that we thought we'd never agree with, and second, even if we continue to disagree with those folks, we see them as human, right? We see them as our neighbors. Caleb, he's wrong on this issue, but he's not a bad guy. We agree on this, and when you can get, that's how you reweave the fabric of the broader democracy through this local democratic participation. So that's if I had to leave with kind of the dominant theme is the potential for, again, democracy to be both a means and an end, right? It's a means to getting what we want, right? And then we think of it as an end, but it's really the means. The process is how we can get to what we want. So with that, I thank you again for letting me participate. This has been really, really fun and insightful.
I would just like to close by thanking everyone for coming out tonight and for making a liar out of Alonda. She's happy about that, and so are we. And stay tuned for the next step, and be ready for the next meeting. Thanks again, everyone, especially Brightside for hosting us.
Great job.